All right. Well, welcome to the advocacy track titled Misconceptions About Home Education. Are we making education policy based on evidence? My name is Russ Hebert, and I'll be moderating this session. What would happen if we challenged the education policies that govern traditional education? What if we discovered that the best way to learn and teach is, in fact, home education? This session will discuss what research evidence has found regarding education and learning. Our presenters are Alison Sauer from the United Kingdom, Ignacy Grau from Spain, Brian Ray from the US, and Deborah Bell, also from the US. We'll begin by hearing from Alison, and then each speaker is invited to follow directly after the last in the order that I announced them. And if we have time at the end, we'll be opening it up for questions. With that, Alison, the mic is yours.
Oh, brilliant. See, the system works now. It's brilliant. Right, so I'm Alison Sauer. I've been a home education advocate campaigner for over 25 years. I started my home education journey when I met John Taylor Gatto. Yay! So, yeah, very inspiring man. Very inspiring. Okay, so misconceptions about home education. Are we making policy based on evidence? Answers from the floor? Yeah! Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Answers from the floor. Okay, so the short answer is no, obviously. It comes from a number of reasons, and traditionally, I think government have been very reluctant to engage with people who are presenting evidence, and it's a bit of a shame. In other areas, sometimes I think they take evidence, but it's a bit of an echo chamber going on. I have an experience very recently where there is an all-party parliamentary group down in London on early childhood. And I should really be a member of that group. But in order to be a member of that group and to attend their meetings, I would have to pay for me to get down there, which would cost me £160 on the train. I would have to pay for an overnight stay because there are no trains back after it finishes. And they want £1,000 from me a year for membership. So in order for me to democratically give them my expertise, they want me to pay for it. So there's a bit of a mess going on. Right. So I'm going to dash through this. This is a model that I developed for the Paris conference in 22. This is my perception of what actually happens in government when they create policies. So they create a perception of a problem that needs to be solved. Oh my goodness me, we've got loads of home educators. We need to regulate them. Then they create the evidence, or they seek around for the skeletons in the cupboard that justify it. Then they brand their policy as modern and progressive, challenge everybody who disagrees, homogenize everybody through their policy, so not allowing for diversification or different opinions, etc. Then the policy dominates the narrative, and this cycle continues with this perception that there's a problem that needs to be solved. So there's a problem that needs to be solved. Children are at risk because they're invisible, because they're home educated. It's not true, but if you feed that into that cycle, you can see it through the years how it happens. Examples of evidence to justify policy. Evidence creation. This is an evidence invention. So Neil Basu in 2017 said that segregated, isolated communities, unregulated education, homeschooling are a breeding ground for extremists and future terrorists. That was absolutely proven not to be true, but we've had that seep into our psyche in the country. This was another one. This was a classic during COVID. This came out in the autumn, November 2020, yes. Fantastic statement. There's absolute nonsense. Not all children who are home educated missing education. For the purposes of this analysis, we have assumed that 75% of the additional children being electively home educated are those who will be missing out on a formal full-time education. A formal full-time education isn't a legal requirement, and they have assumed that 75%. So this is evidence that's not evidence, that's portrayed as evidence. And these figures are repeated when we get government briefings, when we get people talking in the House of Commons, etc., as if they are evidence. They are not evidence. This was another one. The humanists, who we don't like very much in the home educating community, they basically said that we need to ensure every child in England receives a broad, balanced education to which they are entitled in a safe environment, portraying the idea that home education was not a safe environment. Humanists UK, by the way, also want to ban any form of education outside of state education because they don't want anybody given any kind of religious education before the age of 10. For me, that makes humanism another religion, but let's just not have that conversation right now. Another example of that, I'm going to apologise to Alan again. Another example for the portrayal of information. We had a consultation about having a compulsory register for children not in school. This is the results of the consultation from the raw figures. 27% of the people who responded said yes, and 73% no, said no. That was not how the government portrayed the figures. The government portrayed the figures like this. That makes you think that more people were in agreement than were not, if you ignore the numbers in brackets next to local authorities, etc. They've given these all equal weighting, and they've given you the idea that most people thought that a register was necessary. In actual fact, that's what the figures look like, if you put them figure for figure for figure, rather than the way they're portrayed. So very quickly, this is a very, very new, but this is hot off the press last week, okay? Merit and Sour, July 2024 at the bottom. On the blue line, that's how many children are home educated in England. The green line is the figures that were given by the Association of Directors of Children's Services, who did a really stupid piece of statistics I won't go into to fill in gaps. The blue line is 100% response rate from local authorities. The green line is what the ADCS came up with their guesstimates, which they use rubbish statistics for. Orange is where the DFE have continued. And the DFE have very kindly also published a figure, which is children who at any point during the year were home educated, and that's the pink figure. So you can see that the pink figure is 3 times that, at least, of the actual figure. So again, portraying something as evidence that's not actually evidence. So last slide. This is getting the real evidence to be taken seriously. We have to fight for change at administrative level. Things are changing. The DFE are starting to listen to real evidence on advisory groups. We keep an ongoing relationship with elected officials. We send in locals to elected officials to tell their stories, ensure universities are involved, and better still, use collaborative research groups like the Centre for Social Mobility at Exeter University and the Centre for Elective Home Education Research, which is new, and keep up the dialogue. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ignacio Grau, and for those who don't know me, besides being Spanish, it has been said, I'm the director of an NGO called Toidel. And what we do is we do advocacy for educational pluralism. What I would like to show today is, I'm not an expert in homeschooling, but I'm an expert somehow in educational pluralism and the role of parents in the field of education, and that's what I'm advocating for international organizations. And I would like to talk about well, the purpose of the world seminar, not talking about how policy, how evidence influence policy making. You all know that what influence politics, especially educational politics, money, power, reality, and in the bottom, there is some sort of evidence. But I would like, and we all know that in this room, like we don't have much power and we don't have much money, but maybe we can have some good moral grounds and some political theory to change it. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So, T.S. Eliot, the poet, and who also thought a little bit about education, say educational discussions are a religious problem. By that, he didn't mean that the discussions about education were theological, but teleological, that the discussions were about the sense of education and what is being a human being. So in this regard, is it policy based on research? No, it's based more on moral grounds. Not only education, but everything. That's why we vote. When we see now's campaign, you just have had a campaign in the UK, and you don't see we are going to raise taxes by 3%. You see things like both liberal or both rebel or both green, or something that is based on moral grounds. And the same goes for educational policies. So, particularly in the field of education, I want to shed some. I was saying this sentence of T.S. Eliot: education discussions are a religious problem. I want to complement that with a sentence of another British writer, who's Chesterton, who say, education is simply the soul of a society as it is passed from one generation to another. So, why is this sentence and this other one interesting? Because the discussions about education are a lot about the aim of education. Education concerns the child. Education concerns the future. It concerns what is built in this world and what do we think it's worth saving to pass it to the next generation. Either if it's happening in the family, in the society, but all the discussions revolve around these topics. So clues on how research that can help influence, like my experience. Does research influence political debate? Yes, it does, but that's what I see it can influence. It shows myths and lies, and it breaks consensus. A good example of that, we did the Freedom of Education Index that I've been talking this morning, and why this has been useful. Well, because many politicians say, why are we the only government, for instance, funding religious schools? And then with this research, we can show that's false. This is not true. But we are not proactive. And people don't like reactionary people. People don't like people who just complain. I know sometimes we don't have an alternative. But I think if we want our research to go beyond academia and beyond academic papers, there is some things I think we should consider. And the thing I think we should consider is have a good solid argument based on public reason to convince people that are not in our field to see why do we think that what we do is good. Also because good theory and good arguments is what shapes evidence-based policies after. So I'm going to throw some ideas here that we should be thinking, and that are discussions that some people will be really happy to hear our theoretical approaches, like why the child is a person and not an individual. Why the family in this regard is the main guarantor of the rights of the child and not the state or not other actors, like the community, for instance. What happens at home that cannot happen in school facilities? But also, I think, and when we think about theory, it's important to understand the argument against people against us, in this case against homeschooling. One thing I see many times is like we like to perceive arguments against what we advocate, like, oh, this is ridiculous. I have heard a lot like this is a Marxist argument. But honestly, I think I can assure you these arguments are not simple. And they are not, well, they are Marxist people advocating against educational pluralism, but they are no longer using Marxist arguments. And I encourage you to read these theoretical arguments and see where for them grounds the moral ground for not enabling parents to have a say in education. And see how can we engage in a conversation with this sort of people. In this regard, as I said yesterday, it's also really important to link that with your personal stories. There is a concept I've been hearing lately, which is the idea of moral spasms. That's when you see something that makes you really mad and you need to react. And our tendency many times is like, hold the horses. But I think there is something good, especially in the field of education, especially if you are parents, like follow that lead, no? What is the moral ground that makes me to be mad at that? And what is my personal story in this regard? And then share it. I think in the field of education, if we think about that, and by that I'm finishing, we think, well, Ignacy, that's nice, but what? Yeah, that's nice, and you need to a speech to finish that and everything. But I think we have good examples, and I'm thinking sometimes we can finalize in this field of people that we would never imagine. And I'm thinking indigenous people in this regard are a good example. Like indigenous people are a group of people that neutral education, neutral public education has proven to be a tool for their assimilation, a tool in order they were banished, their culture, their language, their cosmovisions were banished. And now that's why now, and they've been able to put out there their stories, and they've been able to put out there their narrative. And somehow also, I think in the field of educational pluralism, many times what we have to say, it's like, this is exactly what it's happening to us. Like we live in an increasing plural world. The Western world is not as homogeneous as it used to be. And we are just claiming things as these people are claiming now in some parts of the world. I've been saying that these days today. I know it's not easy, but you know, if it wasn't easy, we won't be here. We won't be, I don't know, in Manchester just having a beer. So go on that. Thank you.
All right, this was a bit of a surprise for me, folks, but I'm thrilled to be somewhere other than the research track and see what the rest of the folks are doing here. So, anyways, here's my story. I home educated my kids K through 12, and then I went back to school when they went off to school, and I got a PhD in educational psychology. I wanted to study how kids learn best and see what kinds of applications we could make to the homeschool community. And here is what I realized in the midst of my first year of studying, of being deep in the academic research and the literature. It struck me that if we had the freedom to build a school from the ground up, you know, we didn't have to worry about government regulations or funding. If we just were free, and you could just build a school from the ground up, based on what the research says about how kids learn best, we'd build a home. Kids are ideally situated in a family in order to learn best. And I want to just share quickly some of the findings from the research that led me to that insight. What we know from the literature is that kids learn best when they believe their teacher and fellow students care about them. Kids need to know that I am known and the people who I am surrounded by are invested in me and my success. I mean, how many of us have had an experience of sitting in a learning situation where we weren't even sure the teacher knew our name, let alone cared about us, or who felt ostracized for some reason by our peers? So that's what a family can provide. Kids learn best when they have opportunity to pursue their interests. So motivation is actually essential to learning. You can't teach anybody anything. You can only motivate them to engage in learning. If kids don't turn on their brains, focus their attention, and put effort forth, it doesn't matter what the teacher or the parent is doing to make it all entertaining or engaging. The child has to choose. That's how our brains are wired. So if we align our teaching with our kids' interests, then you are cooperating with the way that I believe God has designed us to learn. My Christian faith might start to bleed through here because I found it just like, okay, we are God designed to learn. He has built us for learning, and He surrounded us with this fabulous universe in order to engage us in learning, and He's placed us in a family to nurture that learning. Kids learn best when they can make choices and participate in the decision making and the learning. How motivated are you in a situation where somebody else is deciding what you do? Think about a work environment where you had a very controlling boss. How demotivating that is. What is your investment in effort and energy when you get to decide what you do? When you are the agent who is deciding what choices, what book you're going to read, what project you're going to pursue, what subject you're studying now. So, I mean, all of this stuff should make sense. We shouldn't even need research in order to validate some of these findings. And I think this is why homeschooling works. I'm getting ahead of myself. But it was so obvious to me when I started looking at the literature. This is why homeschooling works. And parents don't have to have all these degrees or special training or qualifications. It is just natural. It is natural to our motivation as parents to engage our children in learning and discovery. And we care about them, so we allow them to have choice and autonomy. Number 4, kids learn best when they can observe older students, older peers who model what success looks like. I mean, we actually create an adverse learning environment for our students by forcing them to learn with their age mates. And you separate them into grades where they can no longer see what's happening. What is my older brother doing in 5th grade? So actually watching an adult perform a very sophisticated, highly skilled task, let's say like football, since that's on everybody's mind. And I'm talking about European football right now. If you watch one of these skilled football players, making a goal, is it a goal? Is it a goal? Okay, shooting a goal. What is other way around? It is very hard for a 6-year-old to emulate that. But if that 6-year-old could watch an 8-year-old shooting a goal, it is a lot easier for the 6-year-old to kind of deconstruct the process and then begin to practice and model it. So by having all these kids, go for it, homeschoolers, you need to have those older siblings who you can emulate. And kids also learn best when they can teach a younger sibling how to do something. And it also increases, we found, achievement when older students teach younger students how to read. We find that actually, surprisingly, the older students' reading scores go up, in addition to the younger student learning how to read better when taught by a peer. Number 5, kids learn best when they have a teacher who is available to provide feedback and support. So there's a role for adults. And it needs to be immediate, it needs to be targeted, it needs to be now. How frustrating is it when you were in school and you needed help and you have to make an appointment at the end of the week with your professor in order to get some assistance? The opportunity is fresh when it's right there. 6, kids learn best when what we ask them to do matches what they're ready to do. First of all, we were not built for standardization. I think I'm going to stop with this point. See me afterwards if you want a couple more tips. We were not designed for standardization. Think about how you describe your kids. If I said, tell me about your children, you would start by identifying the distinctive characteristics of each child. Oh, I know my grandson, Joseph, he is our STEM student already. He's our little engineer. What he can do with Legos is just mind-blowing. And my granddaughter, Amelia, she's our ballerina. I mean, I'm going to start talking to you about them with what makes them distinct. None of us are trying to raise standardized kids. That's why we're not putting them in a standardized system. And that is because we understand intuitively that kids have uniqueness and they are individuals. And so, really, why homeschooling works and what the literature really supports is that kids learn best when they have a personalized program because they were designed by God for individualized instruction. So, thank you very much.
I apologize too. I got all confused about timing.
Brian and I
I'm sorry. I would have been alone. Jeez. Come on, Brian. Come on, Brian. Okay, so my goodness. All right. I get to use this. May I use this thing? Is that on? Whoa, on. And you're gonna flash some timing at me? What do I
push the button up.
push the button up? The button up. I have to stand here. Education policy based on the empirical evidence. Here's a little quote. Some of you know this quote from Dr. They don't call Dr. lawyers doctors, but she's a doctor. Elizabeth Bartolet. Quote in her article, she says, "This article calls for radical transformation in the homeschooling regime and a related rethinking of child's rights. It recommends a presumptive ban on homeschooling with the burden on parents to demonstrate justification for permission to homeschool." So that's the United States, the land of the free, the home of the brave. And of course, she started a little firestorm, and we had all kinds of responses to that. We have articles, there's a book, there's whole thing got going on that. So what does the research say? I'm just going to do a quick summary. A lot of you into the research already know this, but I'll just lay a groundwork, but then I'm going to get a little more philosophical after this. I'm trying to multitask here. It doesn't work for me very well. I'm just going to go with up here. Descriptive summary of statistics, and we've known this for a long time, even before the new experimental Bureau of Census Pulse survey, and some scholars, some of my colleagues are kind of like acting like this is new stuff. This isn't new stuff. We've known for a long time, even way back when some negative critics of homeschooling were talking. They tried to portray homeschooling in the United States as only white, only rich, only highly educated people. It was never really like that. Only fundamentalist right-wing Christians. There was always a variety. Back in the 1980s, I was being sent manila envelopes with rainbows on them, and Kids Live Now, and this is 38 years ago. But the diversity has increased. Okay, so yes, it was disproportionately white Anglo. Now it's almost getting proportional in the United States. I don't like the term race because I'm a Christian. It's not a biblical term, but we have all kinds of ethnicities involved in homeschooling. The household income, again, people just say it was rich people. It never was. It was median income. In fact, now it's looking like it's lower than median income in the United States. Parent formal education level, yes, a little bit higher than average, and that's kind of hanging in there, but that's going down also. Teacher certification status of the parents, very few. It's from my studies, not many other people ask this, but I would say less than 10% have ever been certified teachers. The reasons people give for homeschooling, again, these are the adults. Today we've talked about adolescents and so forth, but the reasons have always varied. Very few parents would ever say there's one reason why I homeschool. There have always been multiple reasons, and so it's good when people ask why, different reasons, prioritize your reasons, all those kinds of things.